Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Patricia Monna Intuitive Consulting. Today, I have a very special guest, Nick Motycka, who is a former RCMP officer and Calgary Police officer as well, who has an amazing story of strength, resiliency, and how to make his dreams come to fruition. Nick, it is an honor to have you on my channel and to do this interview. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the time and space to share my story.
Absolutely. So let's delve in because you've got an amazing story that I stand behind 10,000%. And yeah, so where would you like to begin?
Sure. So I guess I'll start kind of at the beginning, which is just how I even got into law enforcement in the first place and kind of give you some background there. So I grew up in a household where my father was a member of the RCMP. And so that was what was modeled to me throughout my childhood. And the priorities that I was, marinated in as a young person was that importance of having a pension and the benefits and the security and all the stability and all of that. And so when it came time for me to choose my own career, that definitely played a huge part in it. And then I recently had my wife, who I call my oracle because she pointed out to me here that I also chose my career from my wounded inner child. And so what she meant and what that means to me is that I wasn't maybe seen or heard or loved in the ways that, young Nick would have chosen. And so in order to gain that acceptance and that praise and pride, or however you want to describe it, from my parents, subconsciously, I picked the career that my dad had been in. And then ironically, my dad hated policing by the end of it. So I chose a career that he hated in order to be accepted by him, which is horribly misguided. And I wouldn't recommend anyone choose their career from their wounded inner child, but that's my story. And I venture to say there's a lot of people out there that have a similar story for sure. So after high school, I didn't see any other possibilities just with what I had been modeled. And I actually I really wanted to pursue design in terms of like cars or motorcycles or something like that. That was something that I just drew steady as a kid. I just loved that sort of thing. And so I even went so far as to go to a technical institute, like kind of an open house, but my grades weren't there basically to be accepted. And so I just okay, well, I guess I'll just be a cop then. And so that's sort of where it started. And then I committed to that, and it was something that I truly did want to do. And I started working in security as a 19-year-old kid at the mall at Chinook Center in Calgary, and then went into different jobs from there: loss prevention and Canada Customs and bylaw services for the city of Calgary, and then with court and prisoner services. So it's called the sheriff's now, but so it was prisoner transport and court security. So all the while I was getting my education, and I went to Mount Royal College at the time it was called, and I ended up getting my degree in justice studies while working in these jobs trying to get into law enforcement. So numerous applications to various police agencies. I kept getting deferred, and it's funny to look at it now. It's like, oh, okay, well, the universe was showing me something, and I wasn't listening. I was just like forcing my way through. But eventually I was accepted into the RCMP. And so I went to depot, and I thought, this is it. I've done it. This is going to be great. And got there and quickly realized that, oh, I actually am not enjoying the training portion of it. And I think for me, it was a lot of just being there and in that energy. So at depot at that time, I was in a dorm with it's a 32-man dorm, and there was 28 of us or 28 guys in this dorm that I was in. So you're like just stacked in there, and so the smells and the noises and stuff, as you can imagine, were not always so pleasant. So pushed through that training, thinking like, okay, once I get out of training, life will be good, right? And I had this keen desire to help people, and that was another big reason why I think law enforcement did appeal to me, besides the childhood stuff that I've already spoke about. So yeah, definitely wanted to do my part to help people. And then also I do have a bit of an adrenaline side of me, and so policing and being involved in exciting things and driving fast and all that definitely appealed to me as well. So I got out of training and got posted to Sherwood Park, Alberta, and got out working, and quickly realized that it wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be. And for me, that was the thing that really disheartened me right from the start, that I still remember to this day, is just the level of deception. So every situation you go to, you're met with usually, well, two stories. Usually it's a he said, she said, usually kind of thing. Not obviously always male and female, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then you have to sort through those, at a lot of times it's lies in order to come to what actually happened somewhere in the middle. And so the perpetrator or the person that you're investigating is obviously not telling you the truth or the whole truth. And it's just human nature, right? To self-protect and keep themselves out of trouble as best they can. And then also in a lot of cases, even the person that called you or the victim has a bigger part in the situation than they're leading on. And so they're being deceptive as well. And so that just really wore on me. I'll just give you an example of kind of a day in the life of a new police officer. So one of my first traffic stops, it's like this little old lady just like rolls right through a stop sign, like blows the stop sign. And you pull her over, come up to the window. It's like, hello there. Like, how are you? Like, I know you're not doing that good because you're getting pulled over, but anyways, and then it's immediately like, why did you pull me over? Like, I didn't do anything wrong. And like, well, actually, yeah, you just rolled that intersection back at whatever it was. And then it's like, no, I wasn't. No, I didn't. And it's like, oh, come on, little old lady, even you were going to lie to me. And so that just like, that really wore on me. And then, as you can imagine, the energy of the situations you go to is never a positive thing, right? It's always dark, and people's, in a lot of cases, it's the worst day, worst moment of their lives. And so
The worst.
yeah. And so that's the energy that you're just in every day, every call, and you're going to dozens a shift. And so that it never felt good to me at all. And I had no insight into this or anything at the time. I just knew that it didn't feel good. But I'd committed and I didn't see an out at all. I had signed up, and I was like, I signed up, like I'm in it for 25 years. Like that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to suck it up. And so I found street level, or like on the street policing, which is by far the hardest job in policing for sure, because you're jack of all trades, master of none. You're whatever an investigative unit doesn't want to deal with or doesn't have time to deal with, it just falls down to the lowest level. And I don't mean that in any sort of a derogatory sense, but like it's the catch-all. And so you're stuck being a first responder. So you're like running around trying to put out fires, not literally, but you know what I mean? And also you're being asked to investigate things, and you cannot be a first responder, an effective first responder, and an effective investigator at the same time. So you're being pulled in so many different directions, and that just never appealed to me. So I quickly in my career was kind of recruited, or however you want to describe it, into more of an investigative role. And that was a lot better for me. So that was in a crime reduction unit. And so we'd look at like if there's a big string of break and enters, or like some bigger kind of property crimes or whatever, myself and another fella, that would be our file. And I did really enjoy that, because it was something where I could actually sink my teeth into it. And so did that for a year or so, and then was recruited into a drug unit in Sherwood Park. And so and I quite enjoyed that drug work. So we were doing a lot of surveillance and then writing search warrants based on the observations that we made during our surveillance. And then we would execute search warrants and arrest the drug dealers. And it was exciting and fun. And you could kind of sink your teeth into one investigation at a time. And then around the 6-year mark of my career, I had met my now wife and mother of my 3 amazing little boys. And so I had to start thinking about someone else's career and where we're going to live and all of that. Because in the RCMP, as you can imagine, you get transferred all over, right? And when you sign up, you sign on the dotted line that you're willing to serve anywhere in Canada. And my career was kind of progressing towards being a dog handler, actually. And so I was raising pups and imprinting dogs is what they were calling it. And then I was also quarrying. So being the bad guy, laying tracks and then getting bit by a police dog. I've been bit by 1,000 police, or like 1,000 times by police dogs. So again, that adrenaline side, I was getting my fix through that.
Wow.
So the way my career was going, I would likely have ended up in the Lower Mainland, and my wife is from Alberta and small town farm girl. And so anyways, she brought up to me in early 2011, she said, you should quit the RCMP and join Calgary Police. And I thought, that's the dumbest idea I ever heard. Like, I'd be giving up so much and have to start all over. And then, like so many times in our relationship, it just takes me like a minute to like actually process what she told me. And then so I came back to her a couple days later and thought, okay, well, let's write out a pros and cons list here. And so we did that, and pros were like this and the cons were like this, and then a lot of the cons ended up not even being cons. It was like pension stuff and whatnot that ended up working out really well. So I applied with Calgary Police it was February of 2011, and then I started with them in May of 2011, and it was a quick 2-week experienced officer course, and then I was out working downtown Calgary in a police car, again in a first responder role on the street. And again, quickly found that being pulled so many different directions wasn't appealing to me. And so after about 2 years, I applied to a drug unit. And I'll just back up and give you a little insight into policing here. So a lot of people will probably already know this, but it'll be interesting to hear it from an officer. So there definitely is a quota. 100% there's a quota. And I always felt I didn't feel ever good about that. I would write a ticket to someone who caused a collision or it was really egregious or whatever, but like, I'm not going to write someone a ticket just to get and in the RCMP, it was 20 a month. And with the RCMP, it was 10 a month. And with Calgary Police, it was 20 a month. And I never got my 10. I never got my 20. And it actually hindered my career. So I applied to an internal in the district. So in District 1, downtown Calgary, I applied to basically the grown-up version of that crime reduction unit I described that I was in with the RCMP. So just bigger, obviously Calgary's a lot bigger center. So there's just bigger, more officers, more units, more basically opportunity for the specialized investigations. So I applied for that. And because it was internal in the district, they looked and see if I was getting my 20, and I never did. And so I didn't get that spot, even though I probably would have been, one of the top candidates for it, I would think, just based on my previous experience and whatnot. So that's a real thing. So, but then I applied to a drug unit. So that was a service-wide unit, so not within the district. And then the fact I didn't get my 20 didn't hinder me there. And they looked at my previous experience and ended up, was a competition, right? So there's interviews, and there was actually psych testing and a bunch of stuff because it was an undercover role. And so, I got it. So now I'm in this undercover drug unit in Calgary. And my wife and I had since gotten married, and we'd had our first son in March of 2013. And I started the undercover course was in May of 2013. So like with a 2-3 month old, my first child, I was now growing a beard and trying to figure out how I can hide my straight teeth so I can buy crack on the streets of downtown Calgary. And so that was an interesting time for sure. And that's when I think I really started to notice like energy more than I ever had before. And in an undercover role, as you can imagine, everything is lies, right? Absolutely everything you're doing is deception and trying to trick people into doing things that they definitely shouldn't do. And like, that's just the energy of it. And I did not enjoy it. My best days in that unit would be when we would do surveillance and the target, I'll just use like police lingo here, but when the target wouldn't roll. So like when the guy that we were investigating, he wouldn't leave his house, and we would just sit in our cars all day waiting for him to leave. And those were like my best days. So pretty strong sign that you're not doing the right job when your best days doing your job are when you don't have to do your job. So, but again, I didn't have a lot of insight into this. I just knew that when I was driving to work on my way in, I could just feel this tension coming into my jaw as I would get closer to the headquarters building where we were based out of. And it just felt bad. Didn't feel good at all. And now with a little bit of background or insight into it, now I realized that what I was doing, I was ignoring my intuition, my every shift of my life, right? Because when you're about to get into the back seat of a car in a back alley at midnight to buy an ounce of meth, your intuition was screaming at me like, don't get in that car, like that's not a good safe place to be. And I would just have to say, shut up, intuition, and then just like get in that car, because that was my job. And to add another layer into that position, how it wasn't going well for me. So I had a sergeant in that unit who was really good. He was a really strong investigator and really knew his stuff, but worst manager. I've like could not deal with people at all. And it was, I was more, so I would get into that car in the back seat buying an ounce of meth, and I was more worried about what my sergeant was going to yell at me about after the buy than I was worried about the drug dealer who was potentially armed sitting beside me in this car. So that's how in my head he was. And so that role was tough on me personally and on my wife, because I didn't have the tools to separate my work life from my professional life or from my home life at that point. And so I wasn't showing up good at all at home either, because I was stressed and not enjoying my role at all. And so my wife actually told me after I got out of that unit that if I would have stayed, we likely would have ended up divorced. And so that just hit really hard, because I didn't realize at the time how much it was affecting me. And so I did 2.5 years in that role. And then at that point I was kind of like, okay, this isn't good and I need something different. And also with drug investigations, and now I'd spent a number of years in the RCMP in drug investigations, and then with Calgary Police in the drug world. And you go to court a lot and you spend a lot of time on the stand testifying, because there's serious offenses, and these drug dealers generally have money to pay for the big lawyers and all the things. And so spend a lot of time in the court. So I got to see how broken our system is from the inside, and how when you have the appropriate amount of money and resources to fund your defense, that you're going to basically get off. And I mean, I'm not saying like every case, of course, but a lot of times
I've heard that from. So
yeah,
it's pretty broken.
Yeah, it's really disheartening for sure. Really disheartening. And so that really wore on me too, because it was like, we're out there literally at times risking our lives to bring these people before the courts, and then they're buying their way out of all the work that we've done in terms of an investigation and whatnot. And so that didn't feel good either. And so at the end of my time in the drug unit, I found a spot, or was looking at a spot in what was called the Gang Suppression Team. And so that was back in uniform now, and we were specifically looking at the high level gang members in Calgary and doing what we can to prevent gang violence. And so what that looked like was in Alberta, it's actually, there's a law that if you're a member of organized crime, you're actually not allowed to be in a licensed premise. And so that our role was to go into bars and find gang members and kick them out of bars. And so, and the reason behind that is, in that world, in that high level gang drug trafficking and all the things that they're into, if the wrong person comes into that bar and sees, rival gang member, there's going to be violence. Like, that's just the world that they live in. And when that violence happens, there's bullets flying and knives and whatever else. And so you can imagine, in a busy situation like a bar, no one is safe in that location while that known gang member is in there, because of that, the potential for violence. And so when we would remove those people from the bar, everyone else is now safer. And it's kind of it's a cat and mouse game, right? We're just like rolling around trying to find these guys, and we kick them out and they go to another bar. And it's kind of a game a little bit. But at the same time, those people that are left in that bar after we kick gang member out are safer. And so for the first time in a long time, I actually felt like I was actually helping people. And I have no doubt, prevent several murders a year for sure in bars. And I mean, just when you have that many people in one location, bad things happen in a big hurry. So so did that job for a number of years, a little over 4 years. And I really enjoyed it because I actually felt like I was doing something, and we weren't putting people through the court system. So I didn't have to deal with the going to court and testifying and seeing that side of it. We were just dealing with people like on the street, and we were doing what we could to make sure everyone was safe, and then moving on. And then that was it. So I saw value in that. And then at the end of my time in that unit, it was a heavy night shift position, as you can imagine, because it's a lot of working in bars. So we'd work 4 12-hour night shifts in a row. And then I had gotten to a point early in my career, I didn't have problems sleeping in between night shifts, and it didn't seem to affect me. But as I got older, I got to the point where I couldn't sleep more than 2 or 3 hours between my night shifts. And as you can imagine, after 4, I was just a mess. I was no good at work. I was no good at home. I wasn't the husband I knew I could be, the father I knew I could be, the friend, all of the things. And so for the first time in my life, I admitted that something was wrong with me in terms of my sleep. And so this is now early 2020. So, and then to what coincided with that is, again, no coincidence, but early in that year, my wife and I had decided to start meditating daily. We did a major gut reset. And so big diet change. And then also I'd rediscovered cannabis, actually. So the year prior to that time frame, cannabis became legal in Canada for the first time. And I had started dabbling with it a little bit, and had found it really helpful for me to give me perspective on things that were important to me, and to be able to focus more on those bigger picture things like family and the things that were actually important. So those 3 factors, the gut reset, the meditation, and then the cannabis, really set me on a crazy path that I'll go into now. So that was early 2020. And so my sleep's all messed up. And so went to the doctor, and he gave me a doctor's note saying that I couldn't work past midnight. And as you can imagine, in policing, that's a little bit career suicide, because it's a 24/7 job. And I'm still a constable, or I was still a constable at that point. So the positions that aren't night shift are, a little limited. But I knew something was wrong. Things didn't feel right in my body. And so I just put that note in, and just sort of for the first time kind of let go of control, and was just going to see what happened. And what ended up happening is I found an amazing fellow officer who was in charge of it was a 10-year position. So as people come out of their time in a unit, he coordinates where they're going to go next. And he was amazing. And so he found me a spot in the public affairs and media relations unit with the Calgary Police Service. And so this was now into we were into March, April of 2020. And so we all know what was happening in the world at that point, lockdowns and everything was really ramping up and going crazy in the world. And he got me this spot in this public affairs unit working, because I mean, now it's pandemic. So I was working from home on a laptop Tuesday to Friday. And that started in May of 2020. So I thought this is great. Like, I don't have to arrest anyone. I don't have to buy any drugs from anyone. I don't have to deal with a gang member. Like, life is good. And then so I was getting my sleep back in order for, this is the first time in my career I had worked, I wasn't working shift work. And so, and just to give you a time frame, so I'm now 15 years into my policing career at this point. And then I did all those other enforcement jobs before that. And so I thought this was great. And it was until the end of June of 2020. And that was when George Floyd was murdered by a police officer in the US. And all of a sudden, my cushy online gig became like the worst. I would have rather been buying an ounce of meth in the back alley or dealing with the gang member in the bar, rather than that whole energy that defund the police movement of that summer of 2020 and all of the negativity that was surrounding policing at during that time. And then specifically being online too, right? Like the keyboard warrior stuff, the stuff that people would say that they would never say to your face, was just, it was dark. It was really dark. And for me too, like, because I chose this career to try and help people. And now I was, being called all sorts of things in this online position. And so I pushed through that summer. I knew it was dark, but I didn't have really any conscious insight into what was going on for me. But later in the summer that year, I started receiving some messages from this young lady who, her mom was had addictions issues and was in and out of shelters, and she'd been missing for a number of months. And so she was reaching out to, yell at me as a police officer, first of all. And then something in me was just like, I need to try and help this girl. So that's what I started to do. I started to contact different investigators and find out what was going on with this investigation. And because there hadn't been one. And so I was messaging with her back and forth throughout that kind of later of time in the summer. And then September 16th of 2020, I started my shift, opened up my laptop in my living room at our home. And there's a bunch of messages from this young lady. And it was a cry for help. She was suicidal and was not doing well. And for the first time in my policing career, in my life, actually, everything just came crashing in on me. I was just staring blankly at the screen. There was parts of my brain I still remember, there's things you need to do. So there was still cop things that were going on, but I was completely unable to act. I was just in this catatonic state, just staring at the screen and I don't even know how long that went on for. And then my wife ended up walking into the room and seeing me and knew immediately that something was wrong. And so she was able to kind of snap me out of it. And then in that moment, I just knew that I needed to call my supervisor, number one. And so I called her, and it was a civilian running the unit that I was working in at that point. So she answers the phone, and I fully break down. I cry for the first time as an adult, first time ever. And so I'm trying to explain to this lady what's going on for me or with me. And I'm having a hard time, as you can imagine, because I have no idea what's happening to me or with me at this point. So she gives me the day off, which was nice. So I knew that how I had been dealing with the traumas that I collected throughout my career, because there's those hard calls, those difficult situations that you're involved in that you don't ever go back to. And so what I would do is anytime I'd be reminded of them with a smell or a location or any other number of ways, it would come back and I would be like, nope, not today. And I would just push it down, right? And just ignore it. And so that had served me for 15 years. And because it went back to early days in my RCMP career. And I knew that that coping strategy had run its course and it just wasn't cutting it anymore. And I needed to do something different. I needed to actually process these traumas. And so I set off on a course to do exactly that, not knowing what that was going to look like or anything. I was just like an open book. I was like, what I have been doing isn't working anymore. And like, help me, basically. So that looked like numerous different psychologists and all sorts of appointments and different things, trying to find the right professional to help me. And what I quickly found is that there was no energetic component to any of these traditional healing therapies or sessions. There was no talk of any sort of spirituality or anything. And that was something that I was really heading on that path at that point. It started about the 9 months prior in early January, and it was really missing. And I tried to find a therapist that had that, side to them, but I never ended up finding it. And so I was doing all the things that they were suggesting, like exposure therapies, and was doing the eye movement stuff and all of those things. And I was getting a little bit of distance, I would say, from my traumas, but it was still affecting me in my day to day. I had no patience for my kids, or I couldn't deal with any sort of adversity. I couldn't make any decisions. I ended up losing about, like 25, 30 pounds. I was, just kind of a shell of myself, and not knowing what was going to actually help me. And so I just pushed through, and it was about a year and a half of these traditional therapies, and I still wasn't doing well at all. In fact, at the end of that kind of year and a half, I WCB. So because my injury happened at work, so it was a workplace injury, so I was dealing with WCP, and I just knew, like, I wasn't going to go back to work until I had actually processed these traumas and was like, I was good, because there's no sense in just sort of not dealing with it and then ending up in a worse situation down the road. And I've seen way too many of my former coworkers end up in divorce and alcohol and cheating on their wives and like all sorts of just things that I was not interested in putting myself or my family through. And so I just was looking for true actual help, like root cause stuff. And so WCB was good at first, and then as time went on, they were starting to push hard for me to return to work. So they put me in a program called the Return to Work program, which, as you can imagine, their goal was to return me to work. And that's how it felt. There was no consideration for what was in my best interest, what was in my family's best interest. It was all about getting me off WCB's books and back working. And so those ladies, so it was an OT and a psychologist, and so it was 2 appointments with each of them a week, so it was 4 sessions a week, and they ended up actually traumatizing me more than I think anything that I had dealt with in policing. Just that energy of like just that pushing me to like suck it up kind of sort of energy, but like not offering me anything that was actually helping me process these traumas. Like I was just regurgitating them over and over and over again, but wasn't getting anywhere. So around that time, my oracle, she told me what I needed was a psychologist who was also a shaman. And so I didn't listen to her at the time, which you're seeing a pattern here, of course. And then about 2 months later, at the end of this program, I was at my worst. Like the way I was feeling, my mental health was at a real all-time low. And one morning, I just, with my back up against the wall, I thought, I need a shaman who's also a psychologist. So I Googled it and I found one, and she happened to be in Calgary, actually. And so I connected with her, and originally she wasn't in a position to help me, but then we were able to arrange a healing session. And so I had this intuitive knowing that plant medicine was going to be a big part of my healing. And so throughout this whole time frame, or this whole journey, this going down this healing path, you can imagine doctors were offering me all sorts of prescription stuff for sleep and anxiety and all the things. And I just intuitively knew that wasn't for me at all. And then as time went on, and like during this whole time, we all know what was happening in the world with big pharma and like them pushing things on us and through the government. And so I was like, I'm the kind of person that if you push me, I'm like, I just dig in, right? And so
Well, Nick, honest to God, when has the government ever been on the right side of history? Honestly. And I don't know if you heard, but on Friday, you know how Zelensky was at
yeah,
Parliament? Well, they just honored a Nazi, an
yeah,
actual Nazi. They gave him a standing ovation. So it's like, oh my God, what is Canada coming to? So yes, I stand with you 1000%. And the minute they started pushing, it was like, yeah, not today, Satan, not ever. No, thank you.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so thank you for taking a stand and seeing through that illusion.
Yeah. And that was kind of, so now I'm, for the first time, I'm listening to my intuition, right? Like I had to ignore it my entire career in order to put myself in the situations that I did in order to do my job. And now I was starting to listen, right? Like went to the doctor, got the sleep stuff. And then when my breakthrough, it was 100% a breakthrough, like that day I described, September 16th, 2020, like it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It felt terrible in the moment and it looked like a breakdown for sure, but it was a breakthrough because yeah, so many things in my life wouldn't be possible without having got to that point and actually realized and started to push to actually heal the root cause trauma that was affecting me. So so this is now, we're into December of 2021, and so we're like, vaccine passports. And I'm now, because of a decision that I made based on my intuition, not to get vaccinated myself or my family. I can't take my kids to hockey games. Like I was a prisoner in my own country, not allowed to travel anywhere, not allowed to travel domestically on an airplane or internationally. And that felt terrible. But I just, again, this intuition, I just knew that something was up, and I just wasn't going there. And so now, so my healing journey really coincides with the whole thing that was unraveling for sure. And
Everything
so
happens for a reason, all in
with
divine
my
time.
shaman, oh,
It's all
big
divine.
time for sure. So we organized our healing journey. Okay, actually, sorry, I forgot one more thing. So around September of that previous, end of summer, beginning of fall of 2021, I had this intuitive knowing that plants again were something for me, and specifically mushrooms, so psilocybin, magic mushrooms. And so, like any good drug cop would do, I just decided to grow my own. So that's what I did. I grew these mushrooms, and I grew them on a sacred geometry clearing plate, and I was doing Reiki on them regularly with a very clear intention. I didn't know what I was going to do with them exactly or what that was going to look like. But I just, again, was just trusting my gut, my intuition, my knowing that this was something for me. So I had these mushrooms now, and now I found my psychologist shaman. And so we arranged a healing journey for January 28th of 2022. So it's our 10-year wedding anniversary, which again is no coincidence. So we weren't living in Calgary at that point. So we traveled to Calgary and we had a healing journey. My wife came with me. And I brought the medicine that I'd grown with very clear intentions to heal myself. And so there was, and for the first time in this journey, I was actually getting that spiritual component, that energetics side of things that was completely being ignored by the traditional therapists. And so it was a legit ceremony, like with drumming and calling in of protection. And it was a beautiful, just really, really cool experience. And so I held that medicine that I'd grown to my heart. And when I say medicine, I 100% mean medicine, because that's exactly what it is. So I held that to my heart, and I read my intentions, which I'd written out in my journal. I read that 3 times forcefully, and then with all the the shaman practices and everything else that had happened, I then consumed the medicine. And my intention was to deal with root cause trauma, like process this stuff, not band-aid, nothing. Like I wanted to go in and actually deal with it. So without any sort of resistance, without thinking about it, I started to feel the effects of the medicine. And I went into the bedroom of the place that we were staying in and actually went right under the covers, which again is crazy, because I now know how important it is to actually block out your eyesight during these psychedelic journeys, because just the way the brain works and stuff. So I just intuitively did that. And so I went under the covers and I went back to my first chronological hard call trauma, whatever you want to call it, from my early days in the RCMP. And I went back there for the first time. I actually allowed myself to relive it in a sense. And with the altered state of consciousness that psilocybin gave me, I was able to see it from another perspective. So the first thing that really stuck out to me was that it actually wasn't even my trauma per se. I was a witness to someone else's trauma story that had culminated on that day when the police were called. And so for me, a lot of those hard ones were suicide related. And so, which again is no coincidence that the one that put me over on September 16th, 2020 was a suicide related call. And so I went back and I was just able to have that awareness that I was just holding on to this trauma for, like, it wasn't helping me. Certainly it wasn't helping the person that was involved in the call. Like, it was just something that I was holding on to for no good reason. And then the second part was this, I can only describe as radical Jesus level compassion for the person involved and what their trauma, what their life, what their story must have been to get them to that point to do that to themselves. And then also that same compassion for myself, in that I was there that day to try and help. And as naive as that may have been at the beginning of my career, that was my intention. And so through those three things, the perspective, the compassion for the person and myself, it just allowed this trauma to process and to release. And also worth noting is that compassion is like high vibrational, like the highest vibration there is. And so that's a huge part of, I think, why that was able to process as well, is because of bringing in that high vibration. And so I just went through my entire career chronologically from the hard one to the next one, and would just go through that same process with all of my traumas up until kind of present day. And I came out of the room, and yeah, it was actually fairly quick based on how, like, the dose I took. I was only in there for, I think, about 2 to 3 hours doing the work, and then came out and had a bath. And then she pulled some cards for us and we were just chatting. And then I'll just mention, while I was in my journey, I could hear my wife and the psychologist shaman in the adjoining room, and they were having a great time. Like, they were just giggling and, like, they were really getting along well. And it was like, I'm in there, like, doing my thing, processing these, like, worst kind of days of my career. And it just, like, every time I could hear them, I would just, like, smile to myself, and it just, like, brought me joy throughout the whole process. And I will say that, while certainly not, like, comfortable memories or anything like that, it was I don't know, enjoyable is not the right word, but, like, that whole day was just beautiful. There was something about it that was just, it was amazing, magical. And so came out of there. And so it's also worth noting that, so this is January 28th of 2022. So the Freedom Convoy in Canada is on their way. They're almost in Ottawa at this point. So I'm feeling hope for the first time in as long as I can remember, seeing the people on the bridges as the convoy's going by, and realizing that I'm actually not alone. I'm not crazy. I'm not the only person here. It was
I was
just
a part of that. I followed them from Calgary up to Edmonton. I couldn't go further because I had to work and everything, but I have to say that will go down in my memory bank as the greatest time of solidarity, community, compassion, love. It didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter what race you were. It didn't matter. We were all one and totally joined in that movement to change things. And oh my goodness. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yes, the people on the bridges and oh
Yeah.
my God, it was the most powerful event I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah, for sure. And so I was, feeling that at that time and that hope for the first time in a long time. And there's no coincidence that that happened, my healing journey on our 10-year wedding anniversary while the Freedom Convoy is on their way. Like, yeah, no coincidences for sure. So it was about a week later, about week to 10 days after my healing journey. It's not like a flip had been, or a switch had been flipped, right? Like it had taken so long to get to the point where I was at with PTSD. And so the psychologist shaman, so she did all the all the testing on me before our journey. And so all the, through the DSM and all that. So I was PTSD and I was on the severe side before my healing journey. So like I said, about 10 days after, I was feeling pretty good, but like, yeah, I was still affected. It took some time for things to integrate and whatnot. And so what I had seen on that day, I believe it was February 7th or 8th. I had seen images come back from Ottawa, and that hope and that love and all the things that we talked about that we were feeling and seeing from the convoy had been replaced with these images were coming back of the police in Ottawa stealing fuel from peaceful protesters, and it's miserable February weather in Canada. It's freezing cold, and the police are stealing fuel from the truckers. And so for me, that was like my line in the sand. So throughout my entire career, like going back to 19-year-old security guard days, like the charter was like always hammered home to me as like that's the law, like that's the law of the land. And if you don't follow people's charter rights, there's remedies. And so in the criminal system, what that looks like is if you breach someone's charter rights, then their charges will be withdrawn. The charges go away, right? And so it was always made super clear to me that you can't mess with people's rights. And now all of a sudden, that's exactly what we as the police were doing, was trampling people's charter rights and it's political will. Like there's no other way to describe what was happening there. Like it was clear political influence on the police, and the police were acting as basically the hired goons of the government. And just to go back to what you mentioned about the Nazi thing, so how ironic is it that that's what's the same government, right? They bring in and hail this individual as a
Literal
hero, this
Nazi,
Nazi.
98-year-old Nazi.
Yeah. While they painted the Freedom Convoy movement as with Nazi ties, and how ironic is it that it was Trudeau's personal photographer who took the photo of the individual with the Nazi flag. And so anyways, I will say I'm super encouraged by stuff like this coming out, because it's all unraveling. It's all coming out and coming up into the consciousness in order for it to be transmuted and the alchemy to come in and to change it, because there's some major changes that need to happen in our world. And so I'm encouraged by the craziness of what's happening, because that's what's happening. It's coming up to the surface.
Well, and it's interesting because this is what Russia has been stating all along, is that they are trying to get the Nazis out of the Ukraine. And now Canada literally honored a known war criminal, a Nazi, and on Zelensky's behalf. So this just goes to show the level of corruption and lies, and connections. Because, I should be careful on my opinions of it, but it's hard when you see what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I,
I can't believe what Trudeau has done to this country, but thank God it's coming out, right? It
yeah.
has to be seen in order to be addressed and changed. So,
For sure. for sure. And like the sign above you, love always wins. And so I'm here for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think
um,
that's why we're here. We're here to change the world.
yeah.
That literally just when I said that, it looked like an orb just went flashed across your screen. So I'm gonna have to rewind the video and see what I just saw on the screen. See if the
Cool.
camera caught it. But
So cool.
yeah, we're here to change the narrative.
Yeah, for sure. So on that day, I was seeing those images coming back from Ottawa of the police stealing the fuel, and I just, it was my line in the sand. And so after my kids were in bed, I wrote out an entry in my journal, and it ended up being about 2 pages, and I called it Part of History. And what I did is I'd written a letter to other police officers to really question what they were being asked to do in Ottawa, of breaching people's charter rights, peaceful protesters, charter rights, and to speak to that. And so I wrote out this entry in my journal, and then I thought, oh, I'll just record myself reading it. And so sat up in my office and recorded myself reading it quick. And then I'm like, I'll just post it to this group I'm part of. So I was part of a group called Police on Guard on Telegram. And so it was other police officers and corrections people and military people and a bunch of people from different kind of background like that, who were thinking the same way that we were at the time. And so I posted to that group and I went to bed, and I didn't really think anything of it. Again, it was directed to other police officers, this video I made. So I woke up in the morning and that video had taken on a life of its own. It received quite a bit of attention, and I was receiving messages from literally people all over the world, just really positive. I think while I meant it for other police officers, I think it really struck a chord with people to see a police officer saying the things that they were seeing and thinking, and just how they're gave them some hope, I think, in a way. And so it was all really positive, except for, well, Global News, they wrote a story on it, which was
Oh,
not so positive.
yeah,
And which is actually super ironic. So I went to Mount Royal, and I got my degree in justice studies, and so that's where I learned about the charter and how important the
yeah.
charter was. And then so Global interviewed the criminology professor from Mount Royal. I don't even know if they knew that I went there, but wrote this piece and was talking about what a slippery slope it is when police officers start like choosing which laws they're going to enforce and not, and like just like really negative news story. And it's just super ironic that this same criminology department that like gave me my ethics and everything, and like how important the charter is, was now saying negative things about me based on my wanting to keep people's charter rights
Yeah.
intact. So super ironic. But anyways, and then the Calgary Police Service wasn't so happy about my video as well. So I received a phone call from a lady in HR that day, and she told me, well, yeah, so if you could go ahead and take that video down, that'd be swell. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that for two reasons. Number one is I don't disagree with anything I've said. Number two is there's no such thing as taking that video down. Like, it's out there. I didn't share it to a specific platform where I could just delete it or whatever. Like, it had been shared outside that group and it was gone. And so she's like, okay, well, yeah, see what you can do, and then I'll call you back tomorrow. And so she called me back, and I told her again, I said, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not even going to try. And I don't disagree with anything I said. And then I got a registered letter in the mail from the Calgary Police Service ordering me not to speak anymore publicly. And so that felt really terrible too, to like be silenced by my position now, because I was still off work dealing with mental health stuff, but I was still a member of the Calgary Police Service at that point. So there was an internal investigation into me and my video. And so prior to that, I'd worked in policing for 15 years before my breakthrough. And I had never had any sort of negative anything on my internal record. I'd never been, squeaky clean. I always had a really high standard of morals and ethics. And even if it meant more work or whatever it was, like whatever the right thing to do was always the right thing to do. And so that carried me through my whole career. And so now, so I'm ordered to not speak. So that felt terrible. And then about 6 weeks after my healing journey, WCB had ordered a comprehensive psych assessment. So completely independent psychologist. They had no idea that I'd done a healing journey, right? I had to organize that myself. I had to pay for it myself. It was completely outside of what they were giving me at that point. And so I went and did this half a day assessment. It was like all of the standardized testing. It was an interview. It was really involved. And so that psychologist called me back a week later and let me know that I no longer even met the criteria for a diagnosis. So I went from severe PTSD, one healing journey, and then 6 weeks later, I didn't even meet the criteria for a diagnosis, which is amazing. And it's not surprising at all, just based on the level of processing and whatnot that I went through on that day. But again, it was still interesting to hear that from a psychologist that I was good. It was like at the beginning of this, I needed a psychologist to tell me that something was wrong with me. And then at the end, I needed a psychologist to tell me that I was good. But anyway, so I was feeling really good. And things were going in the right direction. And then so in that moment, my benefits stopped, right? Like now that I don't have a diagnosis, it's like, okay, WCB is done. And like, when are you coming back to work? And so if I were to go back into policing, I would end up re-traumatizing myself. I've
Because you would have
changed
had to take something that you didn't want to take, too.
that too. Yeah, for sure. And then, so that was, even though we're actually living like 3.5 hours away from Calgary, and their initial like plan to get me back to work was to do a bunch of training and stuff online. And I was going to have to test every 2 days, even though I was 3.5 hours away from Calgary. And so it was just the level of just nothing made sense during that time. And so with my family, my in-laws and my wife, they were incredibly supportive. And so made the only decision for me, and that was to resign from policing. And so based on my own mental health, and also the fact that I just don't believe in what has happened to law enforcement in the past few years with the political influence, and with what we saw in Ottawa and even in Calgary with the injunction against peaceful protesters, where it made it an arrestable offense to jaywalk or walk off of a sidewalk. So what that let the police do is actually physically arrest people that were committing bylaw infractions, which is wild. And then never mind all of the internal politics in Calgary with the commission and the council and all of that during that time. And so, I made that decision to resign. And so my last day as a police officer technically was just with the way leave and everything worked out, was April 20th of 2022. So 420. So wow. I see you, universe. Well played.
Definitely a sign. So what have you been doing now? Because you have your own clothing line, Nick. Want to talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. So right at the beginning, actually, of this whole story, so in early 2020, during that time when we first started meditating, one night during meditation, this idea for what ended up becoming what you see behind me came to me, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. And so I was struggling at that time to find a locally made, natural fiber, good fitting, quality, just basic men's t-shirt. And so in that meditation, I had the idea to just make it myself. And so during that whole journey of healing and all of that, I was very slowly working on this apparel brand that ended up becoming flow state designs. And so it's based on those three pillars that I talked about that I couldn't find. And so everything's sewn in Calgary, Alberta. It's made with hemp and organic cotton. And it's just like, it took me 2.5 years to get the fit where I want it, because like I'm a real attention to detail kind of guy. So it's like every seam has to be like the exact length, and everything's just got to be just right. And so it took me a long time to get to an actual product available for sale. And so I'm really proud of what I've been able to create, because I mean, I had no background in fashion or anything. I knew what I wanted, and I knew what it was going to feel like and fit like, and just the energy of it. I knew what that was going to be, but to get it from here into physical form was a heck of a process. So I've gotten there now, and it's the opposite of what we see so much in our world, like the fast fashion model that's based on maximum profit and just at the expense of the planet and the people making the clothing itself. Because I mean, it's all made in these third world countries in terrible conditions, and the pollution and whatnot that comes from the clothing industry is just atrocious. And so this is the exact opposite of that. This is very much slow fashion and very intentional in terms of where it's made and the fabrics it's made from. And then to even take it to another level, I've had a small piece of clear quartz crystal sewn into the care and content label on every shirt. And so, and I've sent those crystals the energies of flow and grace and abundance and gratitude and a bunch of energies along those lines, and then had that sewn into the label. So it's very intentional, and it's just slow fashion, and it's something that I certainly couldn't find in the market. There's some really cool brands doing some neat things, but I could never find one that would check all three of those. I could find a really nice shirt, but it would be, polyester based and made in Bangladesh, or, any other combination. But to find all three of those in one product, this is it.
Conscious clothing. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I think that there is so much more for you to do with that clothing line. I know we've had little chats, and I know that when you put your energy into something, it will grow wings. It will have its own, it will take on its own nature and literally manifest. So I know that you made the right decision. You know that you made the right decision. And I really feel that the world is ready for what you have to offer. And yeah, your passion, it shows. I know that we've talked about it before, and I just think that there's still so much. There's so much. There's so much. And I can't wait to watch your brand grow. I really can't, because I totally believe in what you're doing. Totally, Nick. It's
Well,
awesome.
no, I appreciate that. And
But
then
where can people find it? Where can people find
yeah,
it? They,
so yeah, it's all website is flowstatedesigns.ca, and the Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all that stuff is all under Flow State Designs, and we can attach those links in the description. That'd be great.
yeah.
And and then so my passion is to have conversations like this, even above the clothing right now, is to share my story of healing, just to give people that example of what's possible when you want to go in and deal with root cause trauma, that there's possibilities out there. You don't have to spend 10 plus years in traditional therapies that may or may not get you back to where you want to be. There's options, and these medicines, these plants that are here for no other reason, have so much potential to help so many people. And so I'm just super grateful to have the time and the space today on your show to share that story, because it's important. There's trauma, unresolved trauma is at the root cause of so many of the issues in our society and in our world. And so I just feel really called to share that. And then I've even taken it one step further and have started down the road to take shaman training myself. So I'm going to be yeah, pursuing that for, well, it's a two-year program that just started. And so I'm excited to see where that leads. And my wife and I are actually getting into facilitating breath work. It's a 9D breath work with, you wear a headset, and it's binaural beats, and there's a whole bunch, there's 9 layers to the experience, and it's phenomenal. I've had an experience with that breath work that I would say was as intense as my psychedelic journeys, and it's just your breath. So yeah, I'm excited to bring that to the world. And I just, yeah, any way I can be of service in terms of raising the consciousness of the planet, I'm ready for it, because that's why I'm here.
Well, the beautiful thing, hurt people,
Yeah,
but healed people heal people. And that's the
nice.
whole point of the journey. Honest to God, it all happens for a reason. And if there's one thing that I learned this year, because I took my own journey to Ireland and England, and my ancestral journey, and one thing that Spirit showed me for sure, that I know without a shadow of a doubt is nothing can be different. Nothing could have been different. Nothing could have
Yeah,
been different. So we just need to observe and not absorb, and become that best healed version of ourselves, and share that with the world. Well, Nick, I hate to wrap it up, but I gotta go. But you, thank you for sharing your journey. And I'd love to have you back anytime. Anytime you've got anything to announce or say or talk about a new program that you're bringing out, I've got your back. I would love to hear about it, and I'm sure my people would too. I thank God that you made that switch, and you watch how many people that your story will impact and help to heal. So, Nick, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I thank you so much for joining me here today.
great. Yeah, and I thank you, and I see the light in you, and all of the amazing things that you're bringing into the world, and the part that you're playing in raising the consciousness. So thank you very much for everything that you're doing as well.
Thank you. And again, I will post Nick's information in the description. And thank you to everyone out in YouTube land that took the time to watch this video. God bless, and Nick, God bless you on your journey. And I know we will talk again, my friend.
Thank you.
Take care. God bless.